What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode. So for today's video, I'm finally going to get a chance to do my review for my Fuji X-S10 camera that I have right here. So to go ahead and let you guys know, this is going to be an in-depth review coming from a beginner's perspective, and also that's going to be included is me coming from a different camera system, which is Sony. If you're new to my channel, I used to use the Sony a6400 and I occasionally use it still today, but I was looking to fully switch over to a different camera system, which I did. So I've already done the unboxing, going over specs in a different video. I will leave that video in the description if you guys want to check that one out. So this is going to be a review for this camera in particular, of using it for several months. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so for my review, I'm gonna go over several things that I liked about this camera and things that I disliked about this camera. Great features, you know, that were functional, or ones that I just found to be neutral. It wasn't good, it wasn't bad, so I just felt indifferent about them. That's gonna be the things that I cover mainly in my review. So starting out, we're going to talk about the body design of the camera here. The camera just looks amazing to me. I really like how it looks as far as like giving more of that practical look, if you will, because it's definitely not designed like other Fujifilm cameras. And I know Fujifilm is known for the design of their camera bodies, but this one is definitely going to be totally different from what they normally create. So this design, for me, I like it a lot. I know for some other hardcore Fuji lovers, it may have to grow on you, but that's one of the things that initially attracted me to this particular camera body itself. I pretty much enjoy everything, the looks, the handle, the grip here, as you can tell, is pretty deep. And one thing about this camera body here that I noticed is kind of like really good for my fingers. Now for me, I have slimmer fingers. I grip the camera in a comfortable fit, and I just don't have any issues with my fingers bumping into the lens or just slipping off the camera body itself. So within the design of the camera body, I find the dials to be comfortable for me to use. Now, if you know Fuji cameras and if you looked at other camera bodies from them, you'll notice they have more dials, like the Fujifilm X-T4 and the previous generations from there. So pretty much they have like their functions in separate dials. As I've used this camera, that kind of interested me, versus, you know, just having everything built into, or having multiple functions built into one dial here. So at the beginning, I stated in my unboxing video that it wasn't ideal for me because I felt like I would have been overwhelmed with all the dials there, but it kind of like definitely changed my mind with using this camera, because I think this particular camera here is more user-friendly than my Sony a6400. Now, I'm not gonna do a comparison with the two in this video because I kind of want to keep it dedicated to the Fujifilm X-S10, but I definitely got more comfortable with taking pictures and changing settings in this particular camera versus my Sony a6400. So quickly talking about the button layouts here, or the button placements, you have your on and off switch right here, of course, and then you have your record button, ISO, quick menu here, and this is a customizable dial here that we will definitely see by default what you can do with this particular dial. Then next we have our PSAM dial. If you're coming from a different camera system, this is going to be a dial that you're more familiar with than the traditional Fujifilm camera bodies. And then over here we have another dial that is customizable, but we will also check out to see what this dial does by default. So on the left side of the camera body here, we do get this cover or flap, and you have your HDMI mini port right here, and then you also have your charging port, which is USB-C, which is a like for me, or a love, because most of the devices that I use every day charges by USB-C. So one cord to carry around for me, and pretty much I'm usually doing that so that way I can get more comfortable with taking photos just out and about, as well as get to know the camera even more. Above that, we have the mic port. You can use an external mic to do some video work. And towards the back here, you can see that this does have an LCD panel. And right now I just have it, you know, flipped over where it's visible. But one thing I'm gonna go ahead and tell you that I like about this right here versus the tilt screen is that you can definitely articulate it flip it around, and close it. So that is a major plus for me because I like the fact that you can protect the LCD panel. Right here towards the right of the camera body, we have the joystick, so you can maneuver around the settings and the camera screen. And then you have your menu button right here, as well as your display button. Inside the camera body grip, you have the thumb rest on the back. Now, initially, I didn't pay attention to this until the XE4 came out, and that made me notice how this built-in thumb rest is very comfortable. To be honest, I really find this very useful, and you can definitely rest your thumb here and also have a better grip on the camera. So across the top here, we have the built-in trash can button right here for, any photos you wish to delete, as well as the playback button. We have the auto exposure lock button and the autofocus on button as well. So again, simple button layouts. Some people may find this to be a little too much. I find it to be just right. It doesn't overwhelm you in how many buttons is there, and it also don't make you have to go into using so many different buttons just to get to where you need to be. And I hope that makes sense. Pretty much going to be it as far as buttons layout. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the menu settings here, or the menu layout. So for this menu layout here, I find this very user-friendly versus the Sony version, and I know most people already know this by now, but as far as the menu layout in this particular camera body, I can definitely easily go through it and see exactly what I'm looking for, as well as make those changes accordingly. And also on top of that, you can definitely go off to this left panel here, scroll through, and create your own menu. So if you use specific settings and you use those quite often, you can definitely set those in this My Menu box over here, and then create your own menu where you can quickly access those settings. So I find this to be pretty nice, and then I also like the colors in here. I think it's easy on the eye. So the next thing I'm going to mention here is the app. It needs several improvements. It's very glitchy. It's not user friendly at all. It barely works for me. Right now, as you can see, there's a firmware update for my camera body here that I need to do. But there is a firmware update if you want to go ahead and do that, or if you already done it. But as far as the app here, it's pretty boring, it's bland, it's not user friendly as I mentioned already, and I just don't understand why they haven't, updated it and just made some significant changes to it. I find when I'm trying to transfer photos that the app just will glitch out, or the photos just don't register. It's like the camera body can't communicate with the app. That's definitely going to need some updating, and I hope they do that very soon, because that's one of the things that I did enjoy about the other camera system that I was using, is that I was able to transfer photos wirelessly without any issues. So some people may enjoy the app or find it to be okay and work for them, and that's cool. But however, I've been having several issues with it. So I just have completely stopped using it, and I transfer my photos through a dongle. I find it to be a bummer, and I'm gonna have to dislike that. Okay, so before we go any further, I just wanna go ahead and organize the likes and dislikes a little bit more. So we're gonna first continue with the likes about this camera body, and then we're gonna follow up with the dislikes. So getting more into my likes, we're going to start off with the Psam Dial. Again, this is more user-friendly for me, and it may be user-friendly for others coming from a different camera system. Now with this style on this camera, I feel like I have become more comfortable in taking pictures in other modes. So basically, I used to just shoot solely in Aperture Priority on my Sony camera. But however, shooting in Aperture Priority mode here is just a little different. I feel like I just can, get the focus a little bit better. I can control the aperture. However, I'm going to talk more about that because it is slightly different versus the Sony camera system, which is what I'm used to. Also in that, I use manual mode, so I've gotten more comfortable with shooting in manual mode. So sometimes when I'm taking pictures, I will switch to take more control of the camera, which is something I never thought I'll be doing this soon. Another thing with this particular ways Fuji has adopted this style into this camera body, it just made it more user-friendly, I would say. Also learning what those priorities can do for you. Now within this dial, you have customization as well. So you have C1, C2, and C3, and also C4. So you get 4 different dial settings to customize what you would prefer to have those set to. And then you also have filter as well as SP, movie or recording dial right here. And then again, still you're able to just press the record button within the grip and you can record that way. So I never really particularly used this mode, and I just normally record just by pressing the button. So that can be a good thing for some of you, and it also can be a negative for you, just depending on how you use your camera or how you learn your camera body. Now, I am going to say, as far as using this record button, it can get a little annoying depending on what you're trying to do or what you're trying to reach immediately. So for example, here, I caught myself a few times pressing this button versus pressing the ISO or quick menu button. So that is another thing to definitely keep an eye on. Another dial that I forgot to mention earlier is this front dial right here. Now, depending on what you're doing, this dial is customizable by default for aperture and shutter, and according to the mode you're in. So for example, if you're in aperture priority, you'll be able to change the aperture. So if you have the lens switch to A, as in auto for the lens, and then you'll be able to control the aperture with using this front dial here. I would say take some getting used to as well, simply because, you know, if you're used to controlling with a different dial, I know sometimes it was easier for me to do it with the back dial, but again, coming from a different camera system, that's how it's set up. Versus this, I would have to do it with the front. Again, if you using it in shutter priority, then you will be able to change the shutter with the front dial here. So as you can see, as I move this front dial, moving the front dial here, and the shutter is increasing. So that's a little tip right there, because I don't know, for some reason definitely was a little confusing in the beginning for me. Now when you're in manual mode, that is going to be different. The camera is going to think you want to control the aperture first. So as I look at the back of the LCD panel here, you have the aperture going up, and that's how you're going to be able to control that in manual mode. So moving on to the other dials here, I mentioned that we were going to discuss this right dial right here. In aperture priority mode, this dial right here is going to change the exposure. So you can see the left side of the LCD panel right here, the exposure settings are changing and it's not balanced, it's set higher. And then if I go back down, it is balanced now. Now, if I switch the camera here to manual, the shutter is going to change. But getting back to this dial on the far left at the top of the camera here, now you got a little flash switch, so you can pop that up and then you can use the flash if you wish to. This dial on the left changes your film simulation. Here we can see we have Velvia, Estia, Classic Chrome, Pro Neg High, Pro Neg Standard, Classic Negative. So here we have Eterna, Eterna Bleach, Bypass, Across, Monochrome, Sepia. So at the top here, this is the ISO button. You're able to change that according to how you want. I may go over that in a separate video for you guys, but right now this is just to show you that you can change your ISO by using the joystick and accessing this button here first. So next we have the quick menu setting right here, and you can change different settings within the quick menu system. I find that I use the quick menu button a lot. However, if you choose to go in depth and you want to go through the actual menu here, you can make all the necessary changes again in the menu. Okay, so one thing I want to quickly talk about here is the battery life. Now, the battery life for this camera is pretty good for me. I use my camera light to moderate in those two categories. I don't put my camera through some extreme heavy usage. I kind of like left a lot of the settings as is, but just to quickly talk about battery, I was able to get around actually a little over 300 pictures off a single charge. So if you have the settings as is default, or if you change a few things depending on what you're doing, again, I'm taking pictures mostly, not really recording with the camera, I can say you can get about around 300 pictures, just to, again, depend on how you're shooting, when you're taking pictures, and how long you have the camera on while you're taking pictures. So if you're just walking around carrying the camera on, you know, quickly taking pictures and snapping photos, then you can get some really good usage. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the LCD panel here. Once again, I like this screen a lot. It's rather large. I think it has a really good sizable screen on here. You don't have a whole lot of settings on the screen. However, you can probably like find it to be still good. So for example, for me, I'm not overwhelmed by how much is on the screen, which I do like. It actually makes me want to kind of dive a little bit more deep into the camera and what is all included in like the menu settings and what I can change. Once again, I do like the articulating screen. It's definitely giving me a different perspective on the articulating screen here. As far as like if you're just taking pictures using the LCD panel, you can definitely see how you can use the joystick to maneuver around to find your focusing point, which I like a lot. Also within the focusing point, when you're looking for your focus, what you want to focus on as far as your subject, you can use this dial right here at the right, and you can do single point, you can do zone. Within that is tracking, of course. And again, the joystick makes it very user-friendly, and I found this to be quick for me if I wanted to focus on something else. I'm gonna definitely solidify my feeling as indifferent for this. You can take pictures by tapping the screen here. That can be disabled if you wish to do so, because I know that can get quite annoying. Or if you are left eye dominant, then that can become annoying as well. Just a little FYI, and that's a tip for you. Okay, so if I had to choose between the joystick and the D-pad, either one works for me. As you can see, my Sony a6400 uses more like a wheel / D-pad style versus just a joystick here. It allows more space for your thumb to rest and maneuver around. I guess if I had to choose, I do like the joystick a tad bit more, but not by much. Yeah, so if I had to choose, it doesn't matter for me. It's all about what you want to do and how much you want on that camera body. Now again, I feel like sometimes this can get a little intimidating versus the joystick, which is probably why I prefer the joystick over the D-pad or the wheel. Either one works for me, and I can definitely work with either one just fine. So I noticed I talked about the touchscreen operations with the LCD panel. To go more of on a positive side here, or kind of end on a positive note, that can be very good for you depending on if you like those features. So basically, using a smartphone, a lot of smartphones are touchscreen obviously, so you can definitely transfer that functionality over to this camera, or you can just use the joystick. So the last thing I want to include about this LCD panel is the nits. Now I'm not sure exactly how many nits included in the LCD panel here, but it's not as bright as I would like for it to be. So you will have to adjust the brightness here when you're out in the sun. So if you're taking pictures, you don't have to do this to cover the screen a little bit to get some shade, and you can just see exactly what you need to. So getting back to the two top buttons over here, for this one you have these little kind of like these 3 camera bodies in this far left button right here, and you can change the speed of the frames. So how many frames are you trying to capture? You're able to change this depending on what mode you're in. If you continue down, you got the CL low speed burst, and here you have your ISO bracketing options right here, balance bracketing, auto exposure bracketing, HDR, panorama here if you want to do some panning. You also have this option here which is called multi-exposure additive. It's a lot I gotta still learn about this camera. Again, this is more just like several months in the beginning stages for me. Of course, at the top here you have your still image. So a lot of these settings here I definitely have to get more familiar with. They all affect one or the other. It just all depends what you're doing. But to continue this review here, it's kind of interesting that Fujifilm did not put these 2 buttons at the bottom right here. There's definitely space for that. I just find it a little weird because then you have to go to more of like a 2-hand system to get to these 2 options, which are kind of vital in how you quickly access them. So it's a little weird, but they're there. Hopefully in the successor of this camera body, there will be a different layout for this. So I hope they do change these 2 because there's just a weird placement for me in my opinion. So moving back towards the buttons here on the right side of the camera body, you have the display/back button here, which we can see, you know, gives you the different options of how you want to display the settings that you're trying to view. And then we have the menu/OK button. If you haven't already noticed, there's a lot of like built-in buttons into others, so you can have this minimalistic design. Again, I feel like that's going to take some getting used to if you're coming from a dedicated button for that option. Again, you know, it's all about what you're comfortable with, and it does take time to just adapt to whatever you're using. If you're happy with this kind of style, this minimalistic button features of this camera body or other camera bodies, then you'll like this. At first it was a little confusing, I will say, but over time, for the past couple of months, I gotten pretty good at working around with the camera. Once again, it's less intimidating, it doesn't overwhelm you. Okay, so as far as the movie format here, I'm definitely gonna have to give it a thumbs up. Now again, this camera only records in 8-bit, which is a bummer, but it depends on how you use your camera. For me, it's not a major disadvantage, or it's not a dislike for me. And by the way, this camera only records 8-bit internally. You can record in 10-bit via HDMI. Camera body includes IBIS, so why not use it? You pay for it, and I think you should use it if you purchase a camera that has IBIS. I don't have the most steady hands in the world, so that was another purchase point for me, was to find a camera that included IBIS at a fair price. So here you can see that you get the IBIS/OIS option, and then you have IBIS/OIS plus digital image stabilization. Now we're talking about the recording here, and there is a 30-minute recording limit. That may be a bummer for you. For me, not a truly big deal as of yet, but I can see how that can be like a negative. However, this may be more like indifferent depending on how you record and if you use your camera for that. I know all you have to do is just hit the record button again, but that's just a feature that I know people are waiting for it to go away, and me included, because I would love to see just cameras not have no limit in the recording time frame. Okay, so now let's go ahead and segue into the dislikes. Now I talked about the app and how I dislike that, and I also talked about a few other things that I disliked early in the video. But going a little bit more down that list here, some things that I just didn't particularly like at all, and they definitely can be changed, of course. And for the rest of them, it's not that many. I don't care for how you would update the firmware in the camera. So you have to format an SD card to download the firmware, or if the app is working, you can update it that way. Now, since I already mentioned that I don't use the app at all anymore, you should be able to update firmware via USB-C. So I don't understand why you have to format an SD card to do that. That's probably another reason why I just haven't done it. However, hopefully in the future this can change. They can make it more easier to do that. As I keep going hard on the app, let's go ahead and continue that with power saving mode. Now, if you ever transfer photos wirelessly, then the camera goes into this weird power saving mode. To do that, when it does that, it kind of glitches. Okay, so I think that's going to be pretty much it. That's going to wrap up likes and dislikes, and even indifference I included. Again, some things that I do like can be found to be indifferent. Some things that I don't like can be indifferent. I mentioned those reasons for the ones that I dislike. So yeah, hopefully you find that information to still make sense for you. Overall, I think this camera is really great. It has a lot to offer, especially at the price point of $9.99. What it has to offer is definitely really good for the market as an additional option for people who come from other camera systems to look at. I did mention reasons as to why I switched from a different system in other videos. I will leave all those related videos in the description for you guys if you want to check those out and get more, details on that. I really find this camera to be just a joy to use. That's probably why I have so many likes about it. So I take this around a lot, and within that, I tested it a lot during, extreme weather. Took this out in 20-degree weather, rain, snow. It was just a blast to use. Again, keep in mind, you have to have the appropriate lens. But while I was taking this camera out, I was using the Viltrox 23mm f1.4 lens here. And I also used the 50 to 140mm f2.8 telephoto lens as well. Now that has the weather gasket on there for the sealing between the lens and the camera body. So that was great to use and fun as well. It's really good. I love this camera a lot. It's made photography very much fun for me. So again, I think this is something that has a lot to offer, but it's not intimidating to get into. And just a few other things I want to mention here is as far as like the sensor. Sensor is great. If you're familiar with Fuji's color science, this sensor is definitely top notch in this category as far as being APS-C. As far as the autofocus here, really good. I felt like I tracked my subject very well with taking burst of photos, and if I wanted to move the focus to a different subject, I was able to do that, and the camera just seamlessly switched over to that subject. You're definitely going to be satisfied in that department. One more thing I wanted to include it is how long does the camera heat up when taking photos? If I'm honest, it does heat up a little bit, but not enough for you to even notice. If you're doing some extreme work with this camera, then you will probably notice a significant amount of heat if you're doing video and taking photos. But if you're just taking photos, if you're wondering, you know, does the camera get hot, it's pretty much non-existent. So with autofocus here, before I forget, you'll notice on the camera body design, you do not have that MCS switch, which is the way you would change the autofocus on other Fuji bodies that have that option or have that feature. This one, the X-S10, does not have that. So I think that definitely provides some difference with those lineups as far as like the X lineups. So all right, you guys, this is pretty much going to wrap up this video. I hope you found the video very helpful. I try to provide as much important details as possible with the experience that I have with this camera body and the camera system. Again, I'm still new to it, so if you definitely found this video very helpful, hopefully you give it a thumbs up as well as consider subscribing. So I'm thinking about doing a settings video, which means that I will just talk more about the settings that I use on this camera, and maybe that can help you guys too. If you know someone who is looking for kind of like a in-depth review for beginners with the Fuji system, and in particular for the X-S10, hopefully share the video with them and it can help them as well. If you have this camera body, leave some comments for me. You know, I'm definitely interested in learning, you know, new things that I haven't discovered just yet, as well as things that you found to be a like or a dislike, and some things you would like to see change. So with all that being said, I will catch you guys in my next video. Peace.